afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Propagandacast Lehr with me, your host, Imperial Dane, Master of Instruction. In this case, we'll be covering a bit of a different topic. Well, sort of usually from the Lehrs, which sort of cover different bits, but this one's sort of more towards a specific type of strategy, that is the Tier 2 rush strategy, which, as you might guess, involves rushing for Tier 2, which generally involves skipping Tier 1 as the Wehrmacht. Generally because, at least in my perception, it's just not worth it. So you're better off just rushing straight for Tier 2 and trying to get out some light vehicles and panzer grenadiers as swiftly as possible, skipping Tier 1 in the process. And they might ask, well, how do you sort of pull it off? Generally, there are two ways, sort of as a rule of thumb. One of them is basically just relying on Pioneers and MG42s. Usually 2 MG42s, 2 Pioneers. You can also go for 3 Pioneers or 3 MG42s. That depends on your taste and overall sort of just how risky do you feel. For example, I mean, a lighter sort of MG Pioneer build there can sort of work it out there. And there's also the other version where basically relying on Ostrom Doctrine. Then instead of Pioneers, you use Ostrom to push forwards with instead. In which case you also got the option to backtick quickly for the infantry company in case you need Panzerfausts to sort of deal with light vehicles. But on the other hand, in terms of the other doctrines, you're pretty much locked yourself up. But by going by Pioneers and MG42s, you keep yourself open for other doctrines and thusly other options. And that's roughly sort of the two sort of main paths there: Pioneers MGs or Ostrom and MGs. And then you sort of basically head to Tier 2. Usually what you then want to do is rush out some 2-2s. Some players go for Panzer Grenadiers though instead. That can also work, but 2-2s, in my personal opinion, can offer you sort of a bit more flexibility to sort of quickly hit your opponent. You might, after once you sort of got a good Tier 2 going, consider skipping back to Tier 1 just for the mortar, since in case your opponents will dig in pretty hard, in which case the mortar can be quite useful to sort of dug in opponents. And if you're playing versus the Soviets, you'll usually also have a small time window where you can rush out a flame for a half-tech. Versus the Americans and versus the Brits, I would generally not recommend it since they can so much faster hit the captain. In which case they can also quickly rush out the steward unless you pull off something a bit tricky as to Wehrmacht, which is basically control both fuel points as soon as possible and keep your opponent off them. If you can do that, though, you can also try to go for a flame for half-track against the Americans unless you've got some idea there they're actually not going to be hitting the captain as soon as possible, which is a bit more tricky. But again, basically sort of try to get out some Panzer Grenadiers or 2-2s as soon as possible, then maybe follow up with a pack 40 plus 2-2s, Panzer Grenadiers, maybe a half-track, and again, depending on what your opponent does, you can consider back-taking. But again, flame for half-track versus Soviets, in particular if they go for a lot of Maxims, tends to be quite helpful. And then, of course, you sort of want to go for a bit later for Tier 3. Rushing for Tier 4 afterwards is not something I'd recommend. It's overall, I think, too risky. Generally want a Tier 3 just at least to get out of Stug or Nostra and sort of help in an extra way deal with light vehicles. Then maybe some Panzer IVs and more Stugs. Again, sort of depends on the situation. You sort of adapt as well. I mean, in theory, you could down the road go for Tier 4, but I think Tier 4 essentially suffers the same issue there as Tier 1, which is it's just not that good. There's maybe one you can bother with at 4, but in terms of comparison, again, Tier 1's a lot cheaper than Tier 4, so it's a lot easier to just backtick for Tier 1 than it is to sort of go for Tier 4, which is a lot more expensive and overall just don't feel offer the same value. But again, that sort of roughly covers the sort of Tier 2 rush strategy. Generally sort of danger side, again, you not quite getting it to work properly, getting hit by a steward, any sort of light vehicles or tanks. Early mortars from the Americans can also throw you off, and certainly light vehicles like the Dodge truck or the M31 can force you to play your MG42s a lot more conservatively and interlocked, sort of to try and cover each other against sort of quickly sort of try and slow it down. Otherwise, you can risk sort of quickly losing map control or even handing your machine guns to your opponent. That turns one of the bigger risks with the Tier 2 strategy, and which does require you then to work your Pioneers and your MG42s closely together. Otherwise, you very much risk handing over the MG42s to your opponent. So it does require some confidence and some solid MG42 and Pioneer play to sort of really work out. But again, if you're less confident, you can use Ostrom to sort of cover up your MG42s. But again, it very much requires keeping your MG42s sort of closely under control. Otherwise, you will risk sort of handing them over to your opponents. So I think that sort of roughly covers the strategy. Again, I'm not going to give you sort of specific build order, sort of an IKEA manual. I'm sort of just going to give you the general ideas what directions you can take it in. And obviously you can sort of try and adapt it further to your own styles and tastes. But personally, I think it's probably one of the best ways to play Wehrmacht against the Allies at the moment. Obviously, as the Allies play more and more against it, of course, set up their own counters for it, it's obviously going to get a lot harder. But I do think it's still of us more than tier 1, and the grenadiers currently. Thusly, I figured I'd make a video explaining, how to do it and, what to be careful with and sort of, where to go with it. Hopefully this is an educational video. If it has, let me know. Let me know in the comments. And like overall, just hope you enjoyed and got something out of it. This is Imperial Dane signing off, and see you all another time for another video. Cheers.